Dark Souls is, without a doubt, a game that changed the industry, and whose influence we will continue seeing for more years to come. In my first Dark Souls video, I explored the game's impact from a psychological point of view, also expressing personal points of view to exemplify the program's impact. Today, I want to explore how this game has changed my perception of other games, to be exact, in 3 different ways. The first one is the most obvious one: combat. I was genuinely surprised when I played Dark Souls for the first time, and saw how fun this game is, and how intricate in terms of mechanics, the combat system in particular. For some years now, combat in video games wasn't a highlight for me, because I have been delving more into games that focuses on stealth, and when there is combat, it is usually more in a cinematic style, like the Prince of Persia and the older Assassin's Creed games. Dark Souls, on the other hand, is not a cinematic game. On surface level, it will look very basic and less entertaining than a game with cinematic combat, but once you boot the game and start experiencing the system by yourself, you will quickly realize how engaging this game is. Now, that's not to say that cinematic games are basic as a result, and that Souls-like combat is the only style that works. To be fair, there is a lot of depth to be found in cinematic or story-driven games as well, more than they are often given credit for, truth be told, but in different ways. Each Prince of Persia, for example, offer very intricate systems that can keep you engaged throughout the whole journey. The original 2 games had a very innovative system that both look and feel uncanny for its time, an overall technological achievement that hasn't really been recreated by any other game that I know afterwards. Simply said, no game has gotten closer to recreate the error-filled fantasy than the original Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia 3D also had an interesting system that brought to the table ideas that are unique within the franchise, and rarely seen afterwards, like weapon variety, allowing you to swap from a scimitar to twin daggers to a quarterstaff, and also the ability to use a bow. Although these systems weren't as polished as combat was in the first 2 games, they still had depth and, surprisingly, for a game of its age, a good number of stylized animations that fueled the cinematic experience that characterized the Prince of Persia brand name. The Sands of Time brought the franchise to the next level, creating a system that was as cinematic as it was fun to use, although too easy to break. Somersaults and wall bounces can basically overpower anything in the game. However, this system was the basics upon which games like Water Within and Assassin's Creed would grow and develop. Water Within easily has the best combat system in the pop franchise when it comes to complexity and versatility, along with visual spectacle. And Assassin's Creed 1 had easily the most balanced and challenging combat system of the original AC games, without sacrificing the visual aspect, which is something that is lacking in the newer games. The Assassin's Creed games as a whole have way better systems than many people give it credit for. The thing is that Ubisoft never tutorialized these aspects of their games, so 90% of the people ended up spamming counterattack and quaffing healing pills. Most of these games are so easy in any case that you are never really incentivized to learn anything because you don't really have to in order to have a decent experience. Why should I buy a mace when the hidden blade is so overpowered? And if you need anything else, your starting sword or tomahawk is more than enough. Aside of the original Assassin's Creed, Unity was the other most complex of these original games, and the only one that actually required you to learn and master its systems. However, before Unity was made, you could easily beat any of these games with your starting gear and by counterattacking anything at almost any time, thus permeating the franchise with a reputation for basic combat, when that is not the truth. This is something that From Software has done miles better with their games. Not only do they create intricate combat systems with varied weapons that actually have differences, but they also create the challenges that force you to learn and master their systems. I have finished Assassin's Creed 2 several times, and I still haven't grasped entirely how to do perfect combos in that game, and I have never really needed to. However, In Dark Souls, I had to learn how to do perfect parries and dodge rolls, for otherwise I would get wrecked. At first, this made the game harder to play, yes, but the more you learn and master, the more you end up appreciating the game and what it accomplishes. Dark Souls is a very versatile game because it not only provides you with a myriad of tools for you to use, but it also incentivizes you to learn them all gradually. When I started playing the game, I would always try to use spells to take down enemies from afar, because I wasn't confident enough as to approach them toe to toe. However, not all enemies can be taken down with magic, because they are too far for you to lock onto them, so that motivated me to learn how to use the bows, because I could aim and fire at a wider distance. Bow and arrow are an extremely powerful tool across the whole game. However, you will arrive at certain areas, like the Zen's Fortress, in which the enemies are positioned in places in which it is difficult, if not outright impossible, for you to see them while aiming, thus forcing you to tackle them head-on. The lack of space in said area will prevent you from rolling too much, for otherwise you will fall to your death, and that forces you to learn how to time blocks and parries. Once you have the parries mastered, you will arrive at Anor Londo, in which you have these painting guardians that move so fast they make it almost impossible for you to parry them, thus forcing you to consider using lighter armor and/or perhaps a lighter weapon, so you can keep up with their speed. At first, I would summon other players to help me fight bosses, and that certainly helped me gather easy souls from some bosses to level up while still learning the ropes, but eventually, there are some bosses that have no ally nearby, or none that I could find, forcing me to get good and take them down on my own. The first main story boss that I defeated by myself was Sif, and I did so under-leveled because I still hadn't found the Lord Vessel. My small scimitar barely scratched the doggy's fur, but I already had the Black Bow of Faris and a lot of dexterity to use it, so I went full archer mode while maintaining a balance of not getting too close, or she would stomp me, and not getting too far, for she would jump and squash me under her gigantic hitbox. I had to maintain mid-distance, dodge roll the sword swings, and pepper her with arrows. This battle took me more than 30 tries and a lot of soul farming to buy more arrows, but the feeling of satisfaction was immense when I could finally beat the doggy, even if the game made me feel miserable for doing so with a limping, whimpering dog right in front of me.
Nature has a way sometimes of reminding man of just how small he is. She occasionally throws up the terrible offsprings of our pride and carelessness to remind us of how puny we really are in the face of a tornado, an earthquake, or a Godzilla. The reckless ambitions of man are often dwarfed by their dangerous consequences. For now, Godzilla, that strangely innocent and tragic monster, has gone to Earth. Whether he returns or not, or is never again seen by human eyes, the things he has taught us remain.
The point is that by not always allowing me to have aid during boss fights, the game made me appreciate more the fights themselves. Afterwards, I would fight bosses by myself more often, and some, like the Gaping Dragon, the Knight Artorias, and Lord Gwyn, are absolute bangers, as you probably know if you've been following my channel recently. In Dark Souls, there is really not a right or wrong way of playing, mainly for two reasons. The developers placed all of these systems within the game for you to use them without guilt, and second, they always find a way to set challenges for each of the character archetypes in order to maintain all of these experiences as balanced and fun as possible. Weird as it might sound, the original Assassin's Creed used to be very much like Dark Souls on that regard, mainly due to the fact that the game gave you an equal amount of missions that force you to learn and master its three main pillars: the pickpocket and assassination missions for stealth, the Safe Citizen for combat, and races for parkour, just to name a few. This structure, however, was not retained in the sequels, and thus the player could become more complacent than they could in the original game. You can play the entire Ezio trilogy and Kenway saga without fully understanding the stealth or parkour systems, for example, or even the combat. Just mash counter-attack and you'll be fine 99% of the time. The From Software games, however, have never become soft, and that has helped maintain their identity and good reputation for more than a decade. To a personal level, I like both Assassin's Creed and Dark Souls very much, and for as much comparisons as I am making between the two, I must say that each game helped me value the other way more. When I played Dark Souls for the first time, I played it almost like an Assassin's Creed game, taking down enemies with my bow, backstabbing them whenever I could, using throwing knives, poisons and bombs, and even doing air assassinations. My previous experience with Assassin's Creed and other stealth games helped me approach Dark Souls in a more cautious, rogue style that prevented me from falling into a lot of traps and ambushes while manipulating enemies to my advantage more often. And although playing the honorable knight with the sword and armor is fun too, I still prefer the clever rogue archer archetype. However, playing Dark Souls taught me to embrace combat more in games, understanding that if the game has a combat system, it is because they want you to use it the same way Dark Souls permits you to be sneaky. Fighting in AC Unity, for example, is no longer as frustrating as it used to be, simply because I now embrace the reality that enemies will detect me sooner or later, and I have restructured my character build to accommodate that reality better. I still go for the stealthy approach, but if I get caught and cannot escape, I therefore fight and enjoy it more than I used to. Another thing that Dark Souls changed in me is the way I perceive boss fights. Very much like the combat, Dark Souls didn't change the way I alone perceive boss fights, but redefined them before the eyes of a lot of other gamers as well. I normally do not like boss fights because they are often too gimmicky or puzzle-like. I don't mind the puzzle-like boss fights in puzzle games or adventure games in the very least, because that's the whole point of puzzle or adventure games. The final battle should be the ultimate battle of the wits for both the character and the player, and as long as the developers do not implement lunar logic or too much trial and error techniques, still looking at you, King Graham. Figuring out a final puzzle to defeat the villain isn't out of place in a puzzle or adventure game, and if done well, it can even become fun. However, I do mind puzzle-like boss fights in action games. You spend the entire game learning to fight in one way, and then the boss fight, instead of truly challenging your gathered skills, simply changes the way the game works, and forces you to learn the patterns of a puzzle in trial and error formula. Or, in the case of modern games, they tell you outright how to defeat the enemy in order to reduce frustration and rage quitting. However, this solution is as bad as over-reliance on trial and error. One way or the other, these boss fights frequently doesn't even fit within the game and the type of character that you are playing as or playing against. Prince of Persia is a great example to this syndrome. In these games, you play the role of an acrobatic swordsman. Therefore, I prefer fighting swordsmen and swordswomen that challenge that skill. That way, my favorite boss fights in the entire franchise could well be the ones seen in the original game, like the Anak and the Vizier, because these two fight like any other swordsman in the game, but only better. They challenge the skills you've been honing the whole game, not changing the game into another thing entirely. However, the final battle with the Vizier at the ending of the second game is an obnoxious mess in which you have to fight scores and scores of soldiers on top a giant spider, as if that makes sense. so that they can occasionally drop life upgrades so that you can become strong enough to summon the titular shadow, which consumes almost all of your health, and throw the titular flame at the Vizier, who is running like a chicken with the head cut off around this maze-like structure that is difficult and treacherous for you to traverse without dying. And to make things worse, you only get one shot, one try, miss, and you consume the rest of your health and die, and you have to retry the whole thing again while time is running low and the princess is dying. And future games don't change much. In this Swordsman series, we are instead fighting generic giant monsters that thrash around in a tempered tantrum, lots of finicky battles with endless quick-time events and weird camera angles, and on the rarest occasions do we actually get to fight a human opponent with a sword that is actually interesting. Prince of Persia burned me out of boss fights, truth be told, and it was because of how gimmicky they often were, and because they rarely fitted within the idea of a character that we play as. Dark Souls obviously is a different game, but it handles its boss fights way better, or at least in a way that I prefer. Instead of giving me quick-time events and new mechanics to learn and master in a matter of minutes, the game offers enemies that challenge the core mechanics I've been mastering across the entire playthrough. I don't feel like I am pressing buttons in an interactive movie. I feel like I am actually fighting and besting a truly powerful beast. Playing these games has also helped me appreciate cinematic games more, in a way, and those that blend mechanical depth with cinematic fanfare, like Days Gone, just to name one. I know myself, and I can tell you that I wouldn't have enjoyed fighting these brutes as much as I do now if I had played this game before Dark Souls. Days Gone implements its dodge roll mechanic and stamina system in a very similar way to Dark Souls. And if I hadn't gathered the mindset to use and time them properly in that game, I wouldn't have enjoyed these boss fights in Days Gone as much. For this reason, I look at other games with boss battles like the Monster Hunter series and Dragon's Dogma with way more interest than I ever did before. Hell, I should give Prince of Persia another try, now that I have a different perspective, and even more so now that the franchise has gone down the 2D Metroidvania route, which sounds like the perfect idea to me because that innovates and differentiates them from the older, more linear games without going for the open world formula that Assassin's Creed has dominated and at times even perfected for so long. The first and only time that Pop went open world, it didn't work so well for them, even if I personally like the game. The third and final point that I want to make is a bit more subjective than the first two. But then again, it might well be the same for a lot of people out there. One particular thing that the Souls series has done is give a distinctive look to the classic knight archetype. If Assassin's Creed redefined the hooded vigilante, then Dark Souls redefined the knightly warrior. Knights are as old and legendary as time itself, and we have seen plenty of knight characters in a plethora of fantasy stories and historical fiction. So many, in fact, that they can blur between one another. However, the way From Software has drawn the knight archetype since Demon's Souls is very unique while retaining all the regalia and honor associated with the image. Characters like the Knight Solaire is very unique and distinctive, or the Knight Lautrec. They even managed to add humor to the archetype with the Catarina Knights without going full Settlers mode. Oh, my sirs, I've been away too long. I promise you that one day your king will return. In any case, From Software has made its knights stand out from the crowds, very much like Fisher-Price with its picturesque toys, Game of Thrones with its different Seven Kingdom knights, and Yacht Club Games more recently with its plethora of knightly characters. Whenever you look at the form of a ghostly knight in Penitence, prayer, or meditating near a bonfire, you know this is a Soulsborne game, or at least a Souls-like. Dark Souls and the Soulsborne series are genre-defining games, and I am so glad I listened to the plenty of YouTubers out there that recommended them because so far I've had a ton of fun. Thank you, Soulsborne fans, and here is to a great franchise. I will certainly enjoy exploring more of these games. If you want, you could leave a few suggestions of Souls-likes that you like in the comments down below, and I'll see if and when I try them out. You can also like and share the video and subscribe if you want to help me build this channel. All of these things help not only to push this channel to more people, but also to inspire me to make more content for your enjoyment. That being said, I want you to stay safe. Have a great rest of your day and or night, and I'll see you in the next one.